By sunrise, Second Chance Ranch was already dying. The land had cracked open like old bones under 3 merciless years of drought. The grass was gone, eaten down to dust. The main pond, once wide enough to mirror the sky, had turned into a flat bowl of split mud where buzzards stood like funeral guests. Out near the broken fence line, the cattle moved slowly, ribs showing through their hides, too weak even to cry for water. Everyone in Pine Creek knew the truth. The ranch was finished. People used to speak the name Second Chance with pride. Now they said it with a smirk at the feed store, at the diner outside church after Sunday service. When a man lost money, they said he's doing about as well as Martin Hayes' ranch. And Martin heard it. Every word. That was why he sat on the porch before noon with whiskey in his glass and bitterness in his chest. He laughed louder than any man should laugh at a dying home, because if he stopped laughing he might have to admit what fear had already told him. His father had built this ranch. His grandfather had cleared the first field with his own hands. And now Martin was watching it all turn to dust. Then across the empty yard, a woman in worn boots appeared from the road carrying nothing but a battered backpack and a leather notebook. Her name was Clara Bennett. And before the day was over, she would say the words no one believed. "I can save your ranch." Martin Hayes stared at the woman as if she had just walked out of the heat and insulted every dead man buried on his land. For one long second the whole yard went still. The ranch hands stopped near the empty cattle pens. Ruth Ellis, the cook, stood frozen in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel twisted in her hands. Even the weak cattle lifted their heads as if they understood that something had shifted. Then Martin laughed. It came out loud and sharp, rolling across the porch and down into the dust. The whiskey in his glass trembled. His shoulders shook. He laughed the way a man laughs when there is nothing left to do but pretend the world has not beaten him. "You hear that, Gus?" Martin called to his foreman, wiping the corner of his eye with his thumb. "This lady shows up walking in from the highway, asks for water, and now she's going to save my ranch." A few of the men gave nervous smiles. Nobody truly laughed with him. They knew Martin too well. They knew the sound of that laugh. It was not joy. It was a door slamming shut before anyone could see inside. Martin Hayes had once been the kind of man people stepped aside for. His boots were always polished, his truck was always clean, and his word carried weight from the bank office to the feed store. He had inherited land, cattle, and a family name that filled a room before he ever opened his mouth. But drought does not care about a man's last name. 3 years had stripped him down piece by piece. First went the grass, then the calves, then the savings, then the respect. Men who used to shake his hand now lowered their voices when he walked into town. The banker stopped calling him Mr. Hayes and started calling him Martin. Even that small change cut deeper than he wanted to admit. So he drank before lunch. He sat on the porch like a king guarding a ruined kingdom. And when fear rose in his throat, he drowned it with whiskey and turned it into mockery. Clara Bennett did not move. Dust clung to her worn boots. Her backpack hung from one shoulder. A leather notebook was pressed against her chest, held there like it mattered more than anything else she owned. "I'm not here to make you laugh," she said. That quiet answer took some of the smile off his face. Martin stepped down from the porch, slow and deliberate, still holding his glass. Up close he looked like a handsome man the world had finally caught. Gray in his hair. Lines around his eyes. Pride in his jaw. Exhaustion under all of it. "Lady," he said, his voice lower now, "my grandfather drilled this land. My father drilled this land. I drilled this land. 3 generations looked for water and found nothing but rock and disappointment." Clara met his eyes. "Then maybe 3 generations looked in the wrong place." The words landed harder than a slap. The ranch hands looked away. Gus Miller lowered his head. Ruth held her breath in the doorway. Martin's pride flared first. It always did. It rose before pain, before shame, before the truth. "You walk onto my property with dusty boots and a little notebook," he said, "and you think you know more than the men who lived and died here." Clara's voice stayed calm. "No. I think the land knows more than all of us." Martin stared at her, and for the first time that morning he did not laugh right away. Because somewhere beneath the whiskey, the anger, and the broken pride, a small part of him wanted her to be right. Clara Bennett had not come to Second Chance Ranch looking for kindness. She had walked nearly 7 miles from the highway because the bus no longer took that broken dirt road. Her throat was dry. Her legs ached. The sun had burned the back of her neck red, and every step had kicked dust over boots that already looked like they had survived a lifetime of hard country. But as she walked, she had watched. She watched the slope of the land. The color of the grass where it still clung to life. The places where the mesquite trees grew thicker. The way certain stones pushed up through the soil like old bones. She had seen dead farms before, but this one was different. Second Chance Ranch looked ruined from the porch, from the road, from the eyes of men who had already given up. Clara did not look at land that way. She looked the way a doctor looks at a patient who is still breathing. Martin Hayes stood before her with whiskey in his hand and anger in his face, waiting for her to back down. He expected embarrassment. He expected apology. He expected the same thing he had learned to expect from everyone who came near his trouble: pity, promises, and then silence. Clara gave him none of that. "I didn't say rain was coming," she said. The yard grew quieter. One of the ranch hands shifted his weight. Gus Miller looked up. Ruth Ellis stepped farther into the doorway, her eyes fixed on the woman with the leather notebook. Martin frowned. "Then what exactly are you selling?" "Nothing." That answer seemed to irritate him even more. "Everybody sells something," he said. "Hope. Equipment. Bank extensions. Bad advice. Which one are you?" Clara took one slow breath and looked past him, beyond the porch, beyond the dry cattle pens, toward the cracked pond bed shining pale under the sun. "The water you need is not in the sky," she said. "It's under your feet." The words moved through the yard like wind before a storm. Martin's jaw tightened. For a moment the whiskey glass stopped halfway to his mouth. He looked down at the dust beneath his boots, then back at her as if she had made a joke too cruel even for him. "Under my feet," he repeated. "Yes. My grandfather drilled this land," he said. "My father drilled it. I paid men with machines, maps, and college degrees to drill it. Every hole came up dry. Then they drilled where the land was silent." Martin stared at her. Clara loosened the leather notebook from beneath her arm and held it against her chest. She did not open it. Not yet. Some knowledge had to be earned before it was shown. "I don't need you to believe me today," she said. "I need you to let me walk the land. And if you're wrong, then I leave. And if you're right?" Clara looked at the dying ranch, the starving cattle, the men pretending not to listen, and finally back at the broken man standing in front of her. "If I'm right," she said softly, "this place isn't dead, it's waiting." For the first time since she arrived, nobody laughed. Not even Martin Hayes. The silence did not last long. Martin Hayes could feel it pressing on him from every side. The ranch hands watching Ruth standing in the doorway, Gus, keeping his eyes low, the woman in worn boots standing in his yard like she had just handed him a truth too dangerous to hold. And men like Martin did not know what to do with silence. So he turned it into a show. He lifted his whiskey glass, took a slow drink, and let a crooked smile crawl across his face. "You hear that, boys?" he called out loud enough for the whole yard to catch every word. "The water is under our feet. All these years we've been walking on it like fools." A few nervous laughs broke from the men near the cattle pen. Not real laughter. The kind people give a powerful man when they are afraid not to. Martin pointed the glass toward Clara. "And lucky for us, Miss Bennett here walked in from the highway with a backpack, a notebook, and enough wisdom to correct 3 generations of Hayes men." Clara said nothing. That seemed to bother him more than if she had argued. "My grandfather knew this land before there was a paved road within 30 miles, Martin continued. "He dug the first well by hand. My father brought in drilling rigs when I was still a boy. I've paid engineers, survey crews, water men, government men, bank consultants, anybody who claimed they could find a drop beneath this cursed ground." He stepped closer, his boots grinding into the dust. "And every one of them left with the same answer. Rock. Dry rock. Dead holes. Empty promises." The yard felt smaller now. The heat settled heavy over everyone. Even the cattle seemed to stop moving. Martin leaned in, his voice sharp but shaking at the edges. "But you show up thirsty, dressed like the roads spit you out, and you think you can see what all of them missed." Clara's eyes stayed calm, but something passed across her face. Not fear, not shame. Recognition. As if she had heard voices like his before, wearing different clothes, standing in different places, trying to make her feel small. "I think the land has signs," she said. "And I think people stop seeing them when pride gets in the way." That hit him. For one brief second, Martin's face hardened into something raw. Then the smile came back, wider and colder. "Pride," he repeated. "Now she's teaching me about pride." He turned toward the men. "Maybe tomorrow she'll teach the cows to read poetry. Maybe next week she'll convince the dust to grow corn." This time the laughter came louder. Some of it mean, some of it forced. Ruth did not laugh. Gus did not laugh. Clara only stood there, with both hands around her notebook, letting the ridicule pass over her like wind over stone. Martin wanted her to flinch. He wanted her cheeks to burn. He wanted her to lower her eyes, mumble an apology, and walk back down the road she came from. Then he could laugh about it in town for weeks, the strange woman who thought she could save Second Chance Ranch. But Clara Bennett did not move. She looked past his whiskey, past his anger, past the broken pride he wore like armor. Then she said quietly, "Mock me if you need to, Mr. Hayes. But mocking me won't bring your cattle water." The laughter died, one man at a time. Martin's smile stayed on his face. But it no longer reached his eyes. Martin Hayes should have stopped there. He should have turned around, gone back to his porch, finished the whiskey in his glass, and let the strange woman in worn boots become nothing more than another dusty memory on a dying ranch. But pride is a dangerous thing when people are watching. The ranch hands were still standing by the empty cattle pens. Ruth Ellis had not moved from the kitchen doorway. Gus Miller kept his hat low, but Martin knew he was listening. Everyone was listening. And Martin Hayes, even ruined, even desperate, could not stand the thought of looking small in front of his own people. So he smiled wider. "All right, Miss Bennett," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Since you're so sure this dead land is hiding water, let's make it interesting." Clara watched him carefully. Martin turned toward Ruth. "Get me paper." Ruth blinked. "Paper. You heard me. Paper and a pen." No one moved at first. The command hung in the heat like a match waiting to catch fire. Then Ruth disappeared into the kitchen and came back with the only thing she could find: a torn piece of brown wrapping paper and an old pen that looked like it had not written a clean line in years. Martin took them from her and set the paper on the porch rail. He wrote slowly at first, then faster, the pen scratching hard enough to nearly tear through. His handwriting was crooked, rushed, and mean with laughter. When he finished, he lifted the paper like a preacher holding scripture. "I, Martin Hayes," he read loudly, "owner of Second Chance Ranch, promise half of this property to Clara Bennett if she finds water on this land and saves this ranch from ruin." A few men shifted uneasily. Martin added his signature with a careless flourish. "There. Half the ranch." He turned the paper around and held out the pen. "Sign it, Water Lady." That was the moment the joke was supposed to end. Everyone knew it. Martin knew it most of all. Clara was supposed to blush, lower her eyes, and say she had not meant it that way. She was supposed to step back from the weight of the words. Half a ranch was not porch talk anymore. It was land. Fence lines, pasture, cattle, bloodline, legacy. It was everything Martin had left. And he had thrown it into the air as a dare. Clara looked at the paper. Then she looked at Martin. The yard had gone so quiet that the old windmill creaking in the distance sounded like a warning. She set her backpack down in the dust. She tucked the leather notebook under one arm, then she reached for the pen. Martin's smile faltered. "Just a little?" Clara signed her full name with a steady hand. No tremble. No hesitation. No fear. When she handed the pen back, her voice was calm. "I'll need a place to sleep," she said. "I'll work with your men. I don't want wages. If I fail, I leave and you get one more story to laugh about." She picked up the brown paper and pressed it gently against his chest. "But if I'm right, Mr. Hayes, this promise stands." For the first time all morning, Martin had no quick answer. The joke had become a contract. And the dying ranch had just found its first heartbeat. Martin Hayes stood there with the brown paper pressed against his chest, feeling the weight of a joke that no longer belonged to him. A few minutes earlier he had been the man in control. The porch was his stage. The ranch hands were his audience. Clara Bennett was supposed to be the fool who gave him something to laugh about before the bank took the last of his land. But she had signed. Not with anger. Not with pride. Not with the shaking hand of a woman trapped by her own words. She had signed like someone who had already seen the ending. Martin looked down at the paper, then back at her. "You really think this means something?" "It means what you wrote," Clara said. A hard smile tugged at his mouth. "That paper was written on meat wrapping. Then I guess your honor is wrapped in it too." The yard went still. Gus Miller's eyes lifted for half a second, then dropped again. Ruth Ellis pressed her lips together, trying to hide the smallest trace of a smile. One of the younger ranch hands looked away fast, afraid Martin might catch him reacting. Martin did catch it. His face tightened. He folded the paper once, then twice, slow enough to make everyone watch him do it. "Ruth," he said without turning around, "put this in the china cabinet." Ruth hesitated. "The china cabinet? You deaf today?" "No, sir." "Then put it there. Nice and safe." His eyes stayed on Clara. "I'll want to read it again when Miss Bennett here decides she's had enough of playing miracle worker." Ruth came down from the doorway and took the folded paper carefully, as if it were something fragile and dangerous. She did not look at Martin. She looked at Clara. There was warning in her eyes. Clara understood it. Martin stepped close enough that Clara could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You want a place to sleep? Fine. You'll sleep in the bunkhouse. Same as the men. That's enough. You want food? You eat what they eat? That's fine. You want special treatment? I don't. You want wages? No." That answer made him pause. He had expected negotiation. Everyone negotiated when survival was involved. A bed, a meal, a little cash, some guarantee that failure would not leave them worse than before. But Clara asked for nothing except access to the land. That bothered him more than he wanted to show. "No wages," he repeated. "No wages," she said. "I work beside your crew. I walk the fields. I study the ground. I ask questions. I take notes. That's all. And if you fail?" Clara looked toward the dry pond where the cracked mud spread wide and pale under the burning afternoon sun. "If I fail, I leave. That simple. That simple. Martin studied her face, searching for the weakness he was sure must be there. Hunger, fear, desperation. Some crack he could press until she broke. But Clara only looked tired, sunburned and certain. It made him angry. It also made something inside him move, something small, old and unwelcome. Hope. He hated her for that more than anything. Gus, Martin called. The foreman stepped forward. Yes, sir. Show Miss Bennett where the bunkhouse is. Give her a cot if one isn't full of mice. Clara picked up her backpack and slipped the leather notebook under her arm. Martin pointed at it. What's in there? Clara's hand tightened slightly around the cover. Notes. From who? People who knew how to listen. His eyes narrowed. That's supposed to mean something, it will. She turned to follow Gus, but Ruth appeared beside her, first holding the folded contract close to her apron. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. You shouldn't have done this, Ruth said. He'll make you pay for embarrassing him. Clara glanced back at Martin, still standing near the porch with his whiskey and wounded pride. I've been humiliated by worse men than Martin Hayes, she said softly. At least he says it to your face. Ruth stared at her, then really stared. The worn boots. The careful hands. The calm voice. The notebook held like a piece of a lost world. You're not just some drifter, are you? Ruth asked. Clara looked across the dying ranch, past the cattle, past the broken windmill, toward the far ridges glowing in the heat. For now, she said, I'm just a woman who asked for water. Then she walked toward the bunkhouse with Gus. Behind her, Martin watched in silence. He had meant to shame her. Instead, he had invited her in. That night, the bunkhouse felt hotter than the day. The walls held the sun long after it disappeared behind the far ridge. The thin mattress on Clara Bennett's cot smelled of dust, old sweat and cedar boards baked dry by years of heat. On the other side of the wall, the ranch hands settled into uneasy sleep, boots dropping to the floor, beds creaking, low voices fading one by one into silence. Clara did not sleep. She waited until the last whisper died. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out the leather notebook. It was not large. It was not beautiful in the way city people thought beautiful things should be. The corners were worn smooth. The cover was cracked from sun, rain and hands that had opened it 1,000 times. A strip of faded cloth held the pages together where the stitching had begun to fail. But Clara held it like a Bible. She lit the stub of a candle Ruth had left on the windowsill and opened the book slowly. The first pages were yellow with age. They were filled with tight handwriting, careful sketches, arrows, circles, and strange little marks that looked at first glance like a language only the land itself could understand. There were drawings of ridges, dry creek beds, tree roots, stone lines, and plants most men stepped over without seeing. Beside them were notes written in a hand that was not hers. Where mesquite grows in a half-moon, look beneath the slope. Flat stone above, fractured stone below. Grass dies first where water is shallow and poisoned. It bends where water runs deep and clean. Clara ran her fingers over the words. She could almost hear the voice that had taught them to her. Her father, Caleb Bennett, had never owned a ranch, never sat behind a desk, never wore a suit to explain the earth to men who had already decided they were smarter than him. He had walked land for a living. Dry land, forgotten land. Land other people called useless because they did not know how to ask it the right questions. When Clara was little, he would take her out before sunrise and make her stand still. Don't look first, he would say. Listen. And she would listen to nothing. No cars, no voices, no water. Only wind, insects, and the soft shift of dirt under her shoes. Then he would kneel and touch the ground. He would point to a patch of green in a field of brown, a line of stones that did not match the hill, a bird circling where no tree gave shade. The earth always speaks, he told her. People just forgot how to hear it. Those words were written on the first page of the notebook. Clara had read them every night for years. Now she read them again with Second Chance Ranch lying silent outside the bunkhouse window. The men here had drilled deep holes and found nothing. They had brought in machines, maps, money, and pride. They had treated the land like an enemy to be forced open. But her father's notebook taught something different. It taught patience, pattern, memory. It taught that water did not hide without leaving a trace. Clara turned to a blank page and began to draw what she had seen on the walk-in. The cracked pond. The dead windmill. The slope behind the cattle pens. The line of stubborn green brush near the western fence. The stones that rose from the ground in a crooked arc too regular to be meaningless. She paused. Then she marked the arc again. Her breathing slowed. Outside the ranch was quiet but not empty. Beneath the dust, beneath the ruined grass, beneath the shame of men who had stopped believing something was still there. Clara could feel it now. Not proof. Not yet. But a whisper. And tomorrow she would start following it. By the third morning, Clara Bennett stopped being a curiosity and became a problem. Not to the ranch hands. Not to Ruth Ellis, who had started watching her with the careful eyes of a woman who knew there was more to a person than what dust and hunger could hide. Clara became a problem to Martin Hayes because every small thing she did made less sense to the story he had told himself about her. She woke before the men. She walked the land before breakfast. She knelt in dry creek beds and rubbed soil between her fingers. She studied ant trails. She looked at the color of stones, the lean of old fence posts, the places where scrub brush grew stubbornly green while everything around it had given up. She did not wander. She measured. She did not guess. She compared. Every mark in her notebook connected to another mark, and slowly, quietly the dying ranch became a map only she seemed able to read. The first real change came at the old kitchen cistern. Ruth had nearly stopped using it. The water had thinned to a dirty trickle months ago, and everyone assumed the drought had killed it like everything else. Clara leaned over the stone rim, dropped a pebble, and listened until the sound disappeared below. Then she asked for a rope, a lantern, and an old bucket with a hole in it. Martin laughed from the porch when he saw her climb down. "Now she's fixing holes with holes," he muttered. But Clara stayed down there for hours. When she came back up, she was covered in mud from her boots to her shoulders. Her hair had come loose. Her face was streaked with dirt. But there was something in her eyes no one had seen before. A small smile. "The cistern isn't dead," she told Ruth. "It's clogged." Ruth blinked. "Clogged? There's still a vein under it. Weak but alive." For 2 days, Clara worked with Tommy Ward, the youngest ranch hand who claimed he was only helping because he had nothing better to do. Together they cleared, packed mud, loosened stone, rebuilt the base the old way, and cut a narrow covered drain in the direction Clara marked with her hand. On the third morning, Ruth lowered the bucket. It sank. Not scraped. Not tapped. Sank. When she pulled it back up, clean water spilled over the sides. Ruth froze with both hands on the rope. Her chin trembled. For a moment, she looked like a woman seeing a loved one return from the dead. "Oh Lord," she whispered. "Clara, there's water." By lunch, every man on the ranch had come to see it. They stood around the cistern in silence, passing the bucket from hand to hand like proof of a miracle. Martin came last. He looked into the water, then at Clara. His face refused to soften. "Kitchen water," he said. "That won't feed cattle. Won't fill a pond. Won't save a ranch." "No," Clara said calmly. "It won't." He almost smiled, thinking she had finally admitted defeat. Then she added, "This is just the land saying good morning." That evening Ruth brought 2 cups of coffee to the kitchen table and sat across from Clara without asking permission. "Where did you learn all this?" Clara stirred her coffee slowly. "My father was a well finder," she said. "Old school. He walked dry country with a pack, a blade, and that notebook. People said he could hear the ground." "Could he?" Clara smiled faintly. "Not the way they meant. He studied. Plants, stones, insects, slopes. The way hills bend. 50 years of looking becomes science even without a diploma. And you learned from him." "First from him," Clara said. "Then from books." Ruth waited. Clara's voice changed, then dropping into something heavier. "I went to college. Then graduate school. I became the woman with a badge, an office, and my name on the door. For 15 years I found water for big people. Irrigation systems, deep wells, reservoir projects. Land everyone said was useless." Ruth looked at the worn boots, the faded shirt, the thin backpack hanging on the chair. "Then what happened?" Clara wrapped both hands around the empty cup. "I trusted the wrong people," she said. The kitchen went quiet. Outside, the first clean bucket of water in months rested beside the sink. Clara stood and looked toward the rocky hills beyond the pasture. "The rest can wait," she said. "Before dark I need to hear what the ridge has to say." And Ruth, for the first time, did not think that sounded strange at all. Ruth did not ask the question again. She had lived long enough to know when a person was standing at the edge of a memory that still had teeth. So she only sat there quiet while Clara Bennett stared through the kitchen window at the dead pasture turning silver under the moon. For a while the only sound was the old refrigerator humming and a night insect tapping itself against the screen door. Then Clara spoke. "I used to work for one of the biggest water firms in the country," she said. "Horizon Groundwater Systems. Offices in 5 states, government contracts. Private developments. The kind of company that sends men in suits to shake hands and women like me into the field to find the truth." Ruth folded her hands on the table. Clara's eyes stayed on the darkness outside. "I was good at it. Better than good. I could read rock layers, soil movement, drainage patterns. I could walk a dry valley and tell you where water had been, where it had gone, and whether it would ever come back. They loved me when my answers made them money." Her voice was steady, but it had gone cold. Then came the Silver Ridge Project. The name seemed to take something from her as she said it. It was supposed to be a luxury development outside Santa Fe. Gated homes, golf course, artificial lake, resort, hotel. Everything green and shining in the middle of dry country. The investors wanted one answer from me: yes. Yes, the aquifer could support it. Yes, the wells would hold. Yes, the nearby towns had nothing to worry about. Ruth's face tightened. But that wasn't what the land said. Clara turned her coffee cup slowly between her hands. I spent 6 weeks out there. I measured every test well myself. I checked the recharge rate, the fracture lines, the old spring records. The numbers were clear. If that development pulled water the way they planned, the people in the small towns around it would lose their wells within 10 years, maybe sooner. She swallowed. So I wrote the truth. Outside, a weak cow lowed once, then fell silent. I put it in the report with maps, measurements, signatures. I thought truth was enough if you wrote it carefully. I was still foolish that way. Ruth whispered, "What did they do?" Clara gave a small bitter smile. My director Daniel Mercer called me into his office late on a Friday. Big corner office. City lights behind him. He praised my work first. Men like that always praise you before they ask you to betray yourself. She looked down at her hands. He said the client was nervous. He said some words were too strong. Unsustainable. Community risk. Aquifer collapse. He wanted softer language. Then he wanted different numbers. Then he wanted my signature on a version of the report I did not write. Ruth's jaw set. And you refused? I refused. For the first time, Clara's voice broke. By Monday they said I had mishandled field data. By Wednesday they said my methods were unreliable. By Friday my name was attached to a fraudulent report I had never approved. They buried my real study. They turned the lie into paperwork, and paperwork is how powerful men wash blood off their hands. Ruth's eyes filled, but she said nothing. I lost my job. Then my license. Then my reputation. People stopped returning calls. Conferences uninvited me. Firms that once begged for my opinion wouldn't let me past reception. And Daniel Mercer smiled through all of it like a man signing Christmas cards. Clara looked toward the sleeping ranch. So when Martin laughs at me, it doesn't cut as deep as he thinks. I've been laughed at in boardrooms by men who knew I was right and destroyed me anyway. Ruth reached across the table and placed one rough hand over Clara's. Clara did not pull away. That notebook, Ruth said softly. That's why you came back to the old ways. Clara nodded. My father found water for people who had nothing. I forgot that for a while. I wanted degrees, offices, respect. She breathed in, slow and shaken. But when the world took all that from me, his notebook was still there. Ruth looked out at the dry land. And now? Clara's eyes lifted. Now I don't need powerful men to believe me, she said. I need the ground to tell the truth. And somewhere beyond the kitchen window, under miles of silent stone, Second Chance Ranch held its breath. The next Saturday, Martin Hayes drove into Pine Creek with dust on his boots and shame in his pocket. He told himself he was only going for feed supplies, but the truth was uglier than that. He needed noise. He needed the hardware store counter, the smell of coffee burning in the pot, the old men laughing by the window. He needed to be Martin Hayes again, even if only for an hour, the man with a ranch, a name and a joke ready before anyone could ask how bad things had become. And Pine Creek gave him exactly what he came for. So where's your water, doctor? Someone called from behind a stack of fencing wire. Heard you've got a fortune teller walking your hills now. The room burst into laughter. Martin leaned on the counter and gave them the show they wanted. He told them about Clara Bennett walking in from the highway. He told them about the leather notebook, the worn boots, the contract written on brown wrapping paper. He made his voice big and theatrical, turning his own desperation into comedy before anyone else could do it first. Half my ranch, he said, raising his hands. That's what I promised her. Half of Second Chance if she can bring water out of stone. More laughter. Then someone asked about the kitchen cistern. Martin's smile tightened. Old pipe was clogged, he said with a shrug. Anybody could have fixed that. But in the back corner, a thin man in a ball cap stopped drinking his soda. He had not laughed once. He sat with his shoulders low and his eyes too sharp, listening to every word like he had been sent there to collect them. When Martin left, the man waited less than a minute. Then he paid, walked to the payphone outside and made a short call to Dallas. In an office cooled so cold it felt untouched by summer, Victor Harrow listened without interrupting. A woman with a notebook, the man said. Fix the cistern. Hayes is laughing about it, but people are talking. Victor said nothing. He only turned a pen between his fingers and stared through the glass wall of his office at the city below. Victor Harrow was known across the county as a land buyer, an investor, a man who arrived during hard times wearing polished boots and speaking gently about helping families out from under their burdens. But men like Victor did not buy dead land out of kindness. After the call ended, he stayed still for a long moment. Then he opened a folder marked with survey lines, debt schedules, and property maps. His eyes settled on the centerpiece. Second Chance Ranch. By late afternoon, Victor had moved his visit up by 2 weeks. 3 days later, a black pickup rolled through the ranch gate, shining so clean it looked almost wet against the dust. Martin watched it from the porch, his jaw tightening before the driver's door even opened. Victor Harrow stepped out in a pressed white shirt, new boots, and a smile that arrived ahead of him. "Martin, my friend," he called, spreading his arms. "It's been too long." Behind him, a young man in glasses carried a leather briefcase. Clara, walking back from the ridge, slowed her pace. She did not know Victor's name yet, but she knew his type. Men who smiled before they struck. Men who used soft voices to cover sharp knives. Men who called a desperate man friend while measuring the value of his bones. They sat on the porch. Ruth brought coffee and lingered just long enough to hear Victor begin. "I'll be direct because I respect you," Victor said. "I spoke with Owen Pike at Meridian Bank. Your debt is no longer quiet, Martin. 3 years behind. Interest on interest. That kind of number becomes everybody's business." Martin's face darkened. "My debt is mine." Victor sighed like a doctor about to deliver bad news. "Not anymore." The young man opened the briefcase. Papers slid across the porch table. Victor's offer came wrapped in concern, but Clara saw the hunger under it. He wanted the ranch fast. Too fast. And for a price that would shame even a desperate man. Martin stared at the number. It was not a rescue. It was a burial. Clara looked past the papers toward the ridge, toward the stones, toward the quiet land Victor was suddenly so eager to own. And in that moment she understood. He was not buying a dying ranch. He was trying to steal a secret before anyone else could prove it was alive. Clara Bennett did not speak until Victor Harrow's truck disappeared beyond the gate. For nearly a minute only the dust remained hanging in the road like the ghost of something that had come to take the ranch away. Martin stood on the porch, with Victor's offer still in his hand. The paper was crisp. Clean. Printed on expensive letterhead. It looked official enough to make a tired man surrender. Clara knew that trick. Lies always dressed better than truth. Ruth came out of the kitchen and looked from Martin to Clara. "What was that?" Martin crushed the paper in his fist. "That was a vulture wearing cologne." "No," Clara said softly. "That was worse." Martin turned toward her. "You know him?" "I know the smell of what he's doing." She walked to the porch table, picked up the folder Victor had left behind and opened it again. Debt numbers, property maps, deadlines, legal language heavy enough to bury a family before they even understood the first paragraph. Then she saw it. A small line at the bottom of the offer. Harrow Land Holdings, LLC. Clara's breathing changed. Martin noticed. "What?" She did not answer. She flipped to the second page, then the third. Her eyes moved fast, now sharper than they had been all week on the ridge. This was not the patient reading of soil and stone. This was the reading of a woman who had once survived paperwork designed to kill her. "Ruth," Clara said, "do you still keep old newspapers?" Ruth blinked. "In the pantry. For wrapping jars. I need them." Within 10 minutes, the kitchen table was covered in yellowed local papers, bank notices, county auction listings, and coffee cups no one had touched. Clara stood over them with her sleeves rolled up, circling names with a pencil. The Russell Place. The Miller Creek parcel. The Navarro Cattle Ground. 3 family farms within 20 miles. All marked by drought. All declared nearly worthless. All bought quietly over the last 2 years by companies with different names and the same mailing address. And behind each one Clara found the shadow of Victor Harrow. Martin leaned over the table, his face losing color. "Those families sold because they had no water." "No," Clara said. "They sold because someone made sure they believed they had no water." The word struck the room so hard Ruth sat down. Clara opened her leather notebook beside the county maps. The old pages looked poor and rough next to the official documents, but somehow they felt more honest. "These farms sit along the same underground fracture line," she said, tracing it with her finger. "Look here, the old springs. The tree lines. The ridge pattern. Second Chance Ranch is not isolated. It's part of a basin." Martin stared at the maps. "A basin. A deep reserve," Clara said. "Maybe older than the county itself." Ruth whispered. "Then Victor knew." Clara nodded. "Someone knew. Someone with surveys. Someone with geological reports. Someone who could tell investors which desperate families to pressure and which debts to buy." Martin's jaw clenched. "The bank sold my debt to him. And once he owns the debt, he doesn't have to convince you anymore," Clara said. "He can push foreclosure by the ranch at auction and call it business." Martin backed away from the table like the papers had become poisonous. For the first time, this was no longer just about his pride, his drought, or one woman's impossible promise. It was bigger. His land was not dying by accident. His neighbors had not all fallen one by one because fate chose them. Their suffering had been measured, priced, and used against them. Martin looked toward the dark window where his pastures stretched unseen under the night. "My God," he said. "They weren't buying dead land." Clara's eyes stayed on the map. "No," she said. They were buying water before the people who owned it knew it was there. Ruth crossed herself. Martin's hand shook as he reached for the crumpled offer on the table. All day he had thought Victor came to rescue him or rob him. Now he understood the truth. Victor Harrow had come because Clara was getting too close. And somewhere in a cold office far from the dust powerful men were waiting for Second Chance Ranch to fall before it could speak. That night Clara Bennett could not stay inside. The kitchen was too small for what she had just uncovered. The papers on the table, the county maps, Victor Harrow's offer, the names of ruined families circled in pencil, all of it seemed to breathe like something alive and rotten. It was not just drought. It was not bad luck. It was not even one desperate rancher being cornered by debt. It was a machine. And Second Chance Ranch was the next piece it meant to swallow. Clara stepped out into the dark with her leather notebook pressed against her chest. The yard was quiet. The bunkhouse lights were off. Somewhere near the cattle pen a weak animal shifted against the fence. Far beyond the dry pond, the ridge sat black against the sky, patient and silent. She walked toward it. Halfway across the pasture, she stopped beside a crooked line of stone and closed her eyes. And suddenly she was not on Martin Hayes' ranch anymore. She was 8 years old again, standing at the gate of a rented little house waiting for her father to come home. Caleb Bennett would return from the dry country with dust in his hair, sun burned deep into his skin, and that same leather notebook tucked inside his shirt. He never came back talking about money. He never said I made a good deal or I beat a rich man or I got paid well. He always said the same thing. I found water, baby. Those folks have water now. That was how he measured a day. Not by what he gained but by who could drink, because he had walked the land and listened. When Clara was little, she loved him for it. When she became a teenager, she grew ashamed of him. She remembered the way other kids laughed when Caleb showed up at school in muddy boots smelling of tobacco, sweat and miles. She remembered how he would kneel in the dirt, taste the soil on his finger, study a leaf, hold a rock to the light and speak with complete seriousness about what the ground was trying to say. Back then, Clara wanted clean offices, printed titles and people who called her doctor. So she ran from him without leaving home. She studied hard like she was escaping. Scholarships, degrees, internships. Her name printed on reports. Clara Bennett, water resources engineer. When she mailed her father a copy of her first major study, she expected pride in words she could frame. He mailed back a dried leaf from a tree that only grew where deep water passed underground. Inside was a note written in crooked letters. Always knew you were a deep well. Standing under the dark ridge now, Clara pressed a hand over her mouth. For years after he died, she had kept his notebook in a drawer. She could not open it. It hurt too much. She thought the pain was grief, but now she understood it had also been guilt. She had spent half her life trying to become the kind of expert powerful men would respect, only to learn that some men respected nothing but profit. Her father had never needed their respect. He needed the ground to tell the truth. Clara opened the notebook beneath the moonlight. The first page was soft from age, the writing faded but still alive. The earth always speaks. People just forgot how to listen. She read it once. Then again. Then she looked at the ridge, at the crooked stones, at the stubborn brush growing where nothing should still be green. Her father had not left her a superstition. He had left her a language, and for the first time in years, Clara stopped trying to prove she was better than where she came from. She knelt, placed her palm flat against the dry ground and whispered, "All right, Dad, I'm listening now." The night did not answer in words. It answered in memory. A line of stone. A bend in the slope. A cluster of plants too green for July. The dry creek bed cutting away from the ridge at the wrong angle. Signs she had seen separately all week suddenly connected in her mind like sparks finding wire. Clara rose slowly. Her breath caught. The water was not under the pond. It was behind the ridge. And if she was right, Victor Harrow had not come early because he feared Martin's debt. He came because Clara was standing within walking distance of the truth. At first light, Clara Bennett climbed the ridge alone. The rest of Second Chance Ranch was still asleep, wrapped in the gray hour before morning, when even the wind seemed too tired to move. Clara carried her leather notebook under one arm and a small flashlight in her hand. The air was cold enough to sting her throat, but beneath her boots the stones still held yesterday's heat. She followed the crooked line of rock she had seen the night before. It did not run like a fence. It did not run like erosion. It bent once, then again, then curved around the shoulder of the hill as if someone long ago had wanted to point without speaking. Clara knelt beside a flat slab half buried in dry soil. At first it looked ordinary. Weathered sandstone. Lichen on one edge. Dust packed deep into the cracks. But when she brushed it with her sleeve, the marks appeared. 3 carved lines. A shallow circle. A shape like a bent arm pointing down into the ridge. Clara stopped breathing. For a few seconds she was not a scientist, not an engineer, not the woman Martin Hayes had mocked on a porch. She was a daughter kneeling before a language her father had spent his life trying to teach her. She opened the notebook with shaking hands. Page after page turned in the morning wind until she found it, one of Caleb Bennett's old drawings, nearly the same shape copied decades earlier from another dry county far away. Beside it, in his uneven handwriting, were 7 words. Written stone marks what the hill protects. Clara touched the carved circle. Then she placed her ear against the slab. The stone was cold. Still. Silent. But below the silence something carried. Not a sound exactly. More like a deep pressure in the dark. A faraway movement, a living hush. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "Dad," she whispered. "You were right." Behind her, a boot scraped stone. Clara turned. Martin stood several yards away, breathing hard from the climb. Ruth was behind him, wrapped in a sweater. Gus, Tommy, and 2 ranch hands followed, all of them looking embarrassed, as if they had been caught walking into church late. Martin lifted both hands. "Before you get mad, Ruth made us come." Ruth snorted. "I did not make anybody. I just said if the woman saving your ranch walks into the hills before sunrise, maybe the men who own boots ought to follow." No one laughed. Clara looked back at the carved stone. Martin stepped closer. "What is it?" She moved aside so he could see. He stared at the markings for a long time. The morning light sharpened them slowly, bringing each line out of the stone like memory rising to the surface. "My grandfather used to talk about this place," Gus said quietly. "Said the hill had writing on it. Said old people knew there was treasure here." Tommy swallowed. "Treasure." Clara wiped dust from the last symbol. "Water," she said. Martin looked at her. She opened her notebook and set it beside the stone. Old drawing beside old carving. Her father's notes beside a message older than every deed, every fence, every family name tied to that land. "This isn't decoration," Clara said. "It's a marker. Somebody knew this ridge held permanent water. Not a seasonal trickle. Not a shallow pocket. A protected reserve." Ruth put a hand over her mouth. Martin's face changed slowly. The pride did not leave all at once. Men like him did not know how to lay pride down gently. But something under it cracked. "All these years," he said barely above a whisper. "My father walked past this." "So did you," Clara said. He looked at her, wounded by the truth but unable to deny it. Clara stood and faced the ridge. "That does not mean the water is ready to give itself up. We still have to prove the depth. The size, the recharge. We have to work carefully or we damage the very thing we're trying to save." Martin looked from the stone to the land below, the dead pond, the thin cattle, the ranch house waiting in the distance like a tired heart. "What do you need?" Clara closed the notebook. "For today," she said. "Every hand on this ranch." Martin did not argue. By noon no one was mending fences. No one was moving cattle. No one was pretending the ranch was dead. The whole ranch climbed the ridge behind Clara Bennett. And beneath that ancient carved stone, Second Chance Ranch finally began to speak. By the next morning, Clara Bennett was no longer looking for water. She was protecting it. The ancient stone had given them the direction. The ridge had given them the place. By the 6th day, the drill behind the hill hit the main zone exactly where Clara said it would, missing her predicted depth by only a few yards. The first rush came up through the pipe with such force that the old driller took off his hat and stood there in silence, staring like a man who had just watched the earth open its hand. No one cheered. Clara had forbidden it. The water was capped, sealed, measured, photographed, and documented before the sun came up. Every sample went into a labeled jar. Every depth was written twice. Every reading was signed by witnesses. She wanted proof so clean that no lawyer, banker, or smiling thief could bury it. During the day they kept the lie alive. On the front slope where the road could see them, men shouted useless orders around a dry test hole. Tommy waved his arms like a stage actor. Gus stood with a clipboard pretending to worry. Dust rose. Tools clanged. The spy in the ball cap watched from the roadside and wrote everything down. Let him, Clara thought. A calm spy was better than a frightened one. At night behind the ridge, the real work continued under tractor lights. Martin carried pipe until his shoulders shook. Ruth brought coffee in a dented thermos. The ranch hands moved like soldiers guarding something sacred. No one mocked Clara now. No one asked if the land could speak. They had heard it. On the 9th night, the phone rang inside the ranch house. Everyone froze. It was close to midnight. The kitchen was dark except for one lamp above the table. Maps, water, reports, and signed statements covered every inch of wood. Clara looked at the ringing phone, then at Martin. "Don't speak," she whispered. From beneath a folded towel, she pulled out a small tape recorder borrowed from a retired water official who had saved more documents than any honest man was supposed to. The machine was already connected to the line. Only then did Clara lift the receiver. "Clara Bennett." A smooth male voice answered, soft as velvet and cold as glass. Or should I say the engineer from the fraudulent report. Martin's face drained of color. Clara raised one hand, warning him to stay silent. Daniel Mercer, she said calmly. It has been a long time. Still signing other people's work, Clara. The old wound opened, but she did not let it bleed into her voice. I'm listening. Good. Then listen carefully. We know what you found. We know what you've been filing. And you know better than anyone what happens when a woman with a damaged professional record decides to challenge powerful men? Martin's fists closed at his sides. Mercer continued almost kindly. Victor Harrow is willing to offer a generous settlement. Withdraw your reports. Turn over your field notes. Stop interfering with the foreclosure. In return, you walk away with enough money to start over anywhere in the world. Clara's eyes did not move from the recorder. And my license, she asked. A faint smile entered Mercer's voice. Restored, quietly, completely. You know we have influence there. Ruth stood in the doorway now, one hand over her mouth. Clara let the silence stretch. She wanted him comfortable. Men like Daniel Mercer always revealed more when they believed a woman was afraid. Then she spoke slowly, clearly, every word placed like a stone in a wall. Dr. Mercer, are you offering me money and my professional license in exchange for hiding a water study again? The line went dead quiet. 2 seconds. 3. Then Mercer's voice returned thinner now. Good night, Clara. The call clicked off. Martin exploded. That snake, he hung up because he knows what he just said. Tomorrow he'll deny everything. He'll twist it, bury it, make it disappear. No, Clara said. For the first time in 11 days, she smiled without exhaustion. Martin stopped. Clara lifted the little tape recorder from under the towel. The reels were still turning. Years ago, men like him destroyed me with one piece of proof, she said. My signature on their paper. My word against their document. She turned off the recorder. Tonight Daniel Mercer returned the favor. No one spoke. Outside under the dark ridge, the sealed well waited with a deep and ancient patience. And inside that kitchen, for the first time, Victor Harrow's empire began to crack. 3 weeks later, the first full stream of water burst from the new well behind the ridge. It did not trickle. It roared. Clear water rushed into the holding tank, spilled over the sides, and ran through the dry channel like the ranch itself had finally taken a breath. The cattle lifted their heads. Ruth covered her mouth and cried. Gus took off his hat. Tommy laughed like a child. Martin Hayes stood frozen. The man who had mocked Clara Bennett in front of everyone now walked toward her with mud on his boots and tears in his eyes. In his hand was the brown paper contract, no longer a joke, no longer a cruel performance. A promise. I was wrong, Martin said, his voice breaking. I laughed because I was scared. I treated you like nothing because I felt like nothing. Clara looked at the water, then back at him. You kept your land alive long enough for it to answer, she said. Martin handed her the contract. Half the ranch is yours. And this time no one laughed. Second Chance Ranch lived again, not because the sky opened, but because one woman refused to stop listening when everyone else had given up. And maybe that is the lesson. Sometimes the answer is not gone. It is buried beneath pride, fear, pain, and the voices of people who tell us we are foolish for believing. Life will test us with dry seasons. People may laugh at us before they understand us. But if we keep listening, keep learning, and keep standing in truth, even the hardest ground can open. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments, have you ever been doubted before you proved the truth? And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story may be the one your heart needs most.